I've got two books today, both from the Jedi Apprentice series. There's actually a third book, but I'm not much interested in it after reading these two. One is Jedi Apprentice The Rising Force, and the next one is Jedi Apprentice The Dark Rival. Here's something cute you can do if you're nerdy enough. Put on the Star Wars title music, ba ba da 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 da, and you can actually read it as if it's the crawl in the back. Not that I would ever do anything so nerdy, or did when I was in middle school when I was reading every Star Wars book I could get my hands on. These books are really bad. I don't know what my middle school self was thinking, really. I'm not sure if I bought them, if they were given to me, if I had my parents buy them, if they were a birthday present. But I have them in my bookshelf, and since I've decided to go through every single book in my bookshelf, these are the first ones that come up, because the top row back there, nothing but Star Wars. Actually, the two top rows on the furthest shelf behind my right, nothing but Star Wars books, and in chronological order, because I'm a little bit obsessive in that way. So, what makes these books really bad? It's sort of a little thing. They're scholastic books, and scholastic books have a formula, and if you've read any Goosebumps books, you know, just think of the main character, the protagonist of the, Monster Blood, which the protagonist is going to be a clumsy kid who's picked on by bullies. And Monster Blood, I believe it's two bully twins. I can't remember if they're male or female. It doesn't matter. They get eaten by the epitomous Monster Blood. But, epitomous? Is that the right word? Doesn't matter. So, you have a character. There's a big problem in literature, and I guess it's not really a problem, but it's a philosophy. And the idea is that if you want to make a character relatable, to make audiences interested in a character, you make them relatable. An example of this is the hobbits in fantasy. The hobbits are a good example of this. They're from outside the world, and they have to be introduced to the world step by step. Luke Skywalker's the same way, step by step. If you're just thrown into a fantasy world, you may not know what's going on. So, you do this with a point of view character that's supposed to represent a stand-in of the audience member. And that works all right. Now, if you want to do this with a kid's book, you're going to make somebody who's like what you figure most kids are, clumsy, because all kids think they're sort of clumsy. They're, not very good at traversing their environment. They don't know as much as adults do, so they sort of interact with things in a little bit clumsier way. Bullies. Bullies are important, because every kid at some point runs into a bully, and every kid hates them. Even if they are a bully, they hate bullies. So, you give, your protagonist as a clumsy kid who's, has a bully to overcome. And the Rising Force tries to do that. The problem is that it picks Obi-Wan Kenobi as a 12-year-old boy just learning, Jedi stuff at the temple. And it doesn't work, because he's shown early on to be able to fight with a lightsaber blindfolded. His bully is in the picture for such a short time. His name is Bruck, by the way, as the Power Rangers bullies Bulk and Skull emphasize or highlight. Don't ever name your kids a B name, because they'll turn out to be bullies, apparently. Or you could argue that this is just lazy writing on the part of the Power Rangers and the Rising Force, but woe betide me to put judgment onto books that I have read and television shows that I've watched begrudgingly. So, Obi-Wan is not a clumsy kid. They keep saying that he's clumsy, but he's never shown to be clumsy, and this is a major technical failing of the first book. And then there's a contrived plot. Qui-Gon, a Jinn, eventually enters the picture, doesn't take apprentices, but eventually he's convinced to take Obi-Wan due to some problems with the Hutts, and blah, 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 blah. It's, I don't want to talk about it anymore. The Dark Rival is slightly better written. It's also written by a different person. That one's written by David Wolverton. This one's written by Jude Watson. It's not as bad, but it's still just as lazy. The villain's name is Xanatos, which is Greek for death. It's an alternate spelling of Thanatos, actually. But yeah, so the villain's named subtly. It's just, when we come to those sort of names that are important in fiction, for example, Shakespeare has a character called Mistress Overdone, who's a prostitute, and the name is significant in Victorian English for reasons that might still be clear to people of modern English. These names aren't bad. It's not bad to have a significant name. Joe Christmas is another one, a famous one. The initials are JC, same for Jesus Christ. Stephen King adopts Joe Coffey for very similar reasons, exactly the same reason, in fact. And they don't come off as bad, but you have to have a sort of suaveness about it. You can't just like shove a character in there and just have them supposed to represent death. If they aren't significant in that particular way, your name fails. And having a cool name is not enough to pass this off as it just isn't. These books aren't bad overall. What they're bad at is in very small ways that add up. So one of the things that you can see what is bad about these books is if you look at any single page, you have these dialogue attributions. Qui-Gon Jinn said crisply. Obi-Wan asked urgently. Qui-Gon sternly replied. Obi-Wan answered reluctantly. Turn to any other page and I don't have to even... Qui-Gon Jinn frowned. Qui-Gon nodded encouragingly. Sai Tremba exclaimed. Qui-Gon repeated. Qui-Gon ordered. Ron Thai's voice faltered. He agreed. Qui-Gon said firmly on ad infinitum. And the reason these are bad is because they just weaken the dialogue. And timid writers are attracted to these to adverbs and dialogue attribution because they're afraid that they're not going to be understood, or even worse, they're attracted to these I agreed, she chatted, they yelled, because they're afraid that the word said gets boring or is uninteresting. Well, that's sort of exactly the point of the word said, though. The reason we have he said, she said, and if you look at most competent writers like Ernest Hemingway or Gatsby, they don't really change that up except for very good reasons. The reason that they don't change it up is because the word said is invisible to the reader. We just look at the dialogue attribution, read along. Oh, Obi-Wan said, Qui-Gon said, Sai Tremba said, Tremba. That's what we do as readers, and we don't need the dialogue called attention to except for a very good reason. For example, there's a character it's a Jane Austen novel, a rather shrill woman, and everybody in that book, speaks normally except her, whose all her dialogue attribution default is screeched, or that sort of thing, and that draws an attention to a character aspect, and it's important and shouldn't be left out of the book. But when it's not important, when you don't need it, get rid of it, because if you continually call attention to your dialogue tags, you lose sense of the dialogue. So don't do that. Readers will thank you. Don't do that. I'm looking at you, fan fiction. There are some interesting things about this book, though. It's not all bad, though the Star Wars universe is such an expansive thing that this idea might have come from outside. But the aforementioned Sai Tremba he's I've got dogs. Hey, little guy. What's happening? You want to learn about literature? I bet you do. I don't know how they got out of the kitchen. Alright, so there are these creatures named... Oh, you went down? There are these creatures named Arconians, if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Arconan. And they are a social group. To put it this way, there's an interesting property of army ants where if you divide them away from their central columns. About 50, I think, is about the number. And you get it so that, they're isolated. They will never find a direction to go. They will just sort of swarm in a circle till they all starve to death, because they're unable to break out of their formation. They're so attracted to each other, and these aliens are sort of like that, except that unlike army ants, they aren't vicious killers, and so they're sort of stuck, and other species can take advantage of this because they're, so timid, but they're like hive mind, so if you convince one of them, you convince them all. Well, Obi-Wan, in the course of these two novels, makes a friend out of one of them named Sai Trimba. Arguably, you could just say that Sai Trimba is now imprinting on Obi-Wan instead of the group, but this character has an honest-to-God character arc, and so does Obi-Wan, so I guess the books don't break in that way. This is an interesting concept to me, because you have these creatures that are, social and cool, and, I kind of like their, insectile nature, and if you get them to be, aggressive, they can chew through rocks and wacky shit like that if you make them angry, and that's cool. The beer I'm drinking, by the way, is Matilda. It says it's a Belgian-style ale. It doesn't taste too much like that to me, but still good.